This is the story of the wisest woman in the world, and this is how I will tell it to you. Once long ago in China, there was a rich man, a rich landowner. He had a lot of land, a grand house, a wife, children, and lots of serfs who did the work for him. But he had one thing missing in his life, and the one thing that he wanted more than anything in the world was to be wise. And wisdom was the thing that he didn't have. But then he heard a rumour that there was a woman in the world, the wisest woman in the world, who had the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie, and he thought if anyone could teach him how to be wise, it would be her. And so he decided to set off and find the wisest woman in the world, which meant, of course, that he didn't need everything he had. So he sold all his possessions. He sold his workers. He sold his house. He sold his wife. Woo! And his children. And he even sold his land. And off he went to find the wisest woman in the world. He travelled west and found himself in a cold, grey land, and there was a man in a uniform who said, "Oh, sir, have you got a permit to be loitering there? Please move along, move along." But he said, "Excuse me, I'm looking for the wisest woman in the world, she who has the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie." But the man in uniform said, "Never heard of her, sir. Please move along, sir. Off you go, sir." And so the rich man had to leave, and he travelled somewhere new. He travelled south to a place that was hot and sunny, and he saw a man who was moving in a most angular way towards him. And he said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm looking for the wisest woman in the world, she who has the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie. Have you seen her? Do you know where she is?" And the man said, "Oh, we do not need the wisest woman in the world, sir, because here we have the wisdom of the ancients. And I suggest you go on your way because you have a fairer way to go if you're going to find the wisest woman in the world." And so off he went. He travelled north and east, coming to a cold land, and he was just looking for someone to ask when he saw a young woman dancing towards him. Yo-ho-ho, yo-ho-ho. And he said to her, "Excuse me, I'm looking for the wisest woman in the world, who has the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie. Have you seen her?" And she said, "I do not have time to talk to you. You are distracting me from my dancing. You are putting me off my steps." And off she danced, yo-heave-ho, yo-heave-ho, leaving the rich man to go on his own way. And inevitably, of course, he ended up back where he started, standing on the land that once had been his, watching the serfs work who once had been his workers. And they saw him and said, "Master, or former master, where have you been? You've been gone a long time." And he said, "I've been looking for the wisest woman in the world. She has the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie." And they said, "Why, she lives here in our village. Did you not know?" And the rich man said, "Then tell me where she is. I must find her." But the worker said, "Oh, you will not find her in the village at the moment. For every day she goes down by the river to think, which is why she is wise." And so the rich man set off to the river. And when he came to the river, there, sure enough, was a woman. And she was standing there leaning against a silver birch tree. And he said to her, "Is it true? Are you the wisest woman in the world?" And she said, "Could be." And he said, "Is it true you have the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie?" And she said, "I could have." And he said, "I want the brain of a fox. I want the tongue of a magpie. Will you make me wise too?" And she said, "Well, I would if I could, but I can't. You see, to make you wise, I need my wise-making kit. And unfortunately, my wise-making kit is back in my house in the village. And without it, I can't make you wise." And the rich man said, "Well, why don't we go back to the village, go to your house, find your wise-making kit, and then you can give me the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie, and I'll be wise too." And she said, "Well, I would if I could, but I can't. You see, I have to hold up this silver birch tree. If I let go, it falls to the ground, and I can't let that happen, so I can't go back to my house." The rich man thought for a while. Then he had an idea. "Well, why don't I hold the tree up for you?" he said. And then you can go back to the village, get your wise-making kit, come back here, give me the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie, then I'll be wise. And she thought about it for a moment and said, all right then. So she let go of the tree while he braced the tree and held onto it. And off she went back to the village. And do you think she ever came back? Well, once the rich man realizes that he really doesn't need to stand there holding up the tree, he will have taken that first step towards wisdom himself. And though it may be a long way before he gets the brain of a fox and the tongue of a magpie, but at least he will have taken that first step and done it all by himself too. And that is my story of the wisest woman in the world, and that's how I have told it to you.